Lewis Hamilton's nightmare Qatar qualifying has taken a dramatic new twist after the FIA uncovered internal evidence that reveals a far deeper problem inside Ferrari than anyone initially realized. And the details behind Hamilton's collapse to P18 paint a brutal picture of a car that was never capable of delivering a competitive lap. Right after Hamilton recorded one of the slowest laps of his entire season and ended Q1 in 18th place, Ferrari and FIA engineers cross-checked structural and aerodynamic data from the SF-25 and discovered a concealed mechanical imbalance that perfectly matched Hamilton's desperate radio messages, where he repeatedly said the car was impossible to control. This newly uncovered evidence not only explains why Hamilton was sliding through the final sector like the rear of the car was on ice, but also highlights how Ferrari's early decision to halt development months ago has left them completely exposed as the season reaches its most demanding tracks. Before we break down the full scale of what the FIA found, make sure you follow along, because the situation developing inside Ferrari right now is far more serious than anyone outside the team expected. The Qatar qualifying session delivered one of the bleakest moments of Hamilton's Ferrari chapter as he ended the session eliminated in Q1 with a 1 minute and 20.097 seconds. While his teammate Charles Leclerc reached Q3, but still finished only 10th, more than a full second behind Oscar Piastri's pole time, which immediately showed that Ferrari's problems are structural, not related to driver performance. From the very first laps of qualifying, Hamilton reported a frightening lack of rear stability, especially through the medium-speed corners that define the Losail circuit. He described the rear axle snapping violently without warning in the final sector, the kind of instability that forces the driver to constantly react rather than proactively attack the lap. During the post-session debrief, both the FIA and Ferrari engineers validated Hamilton's feedback by identifying a mechanical imbalance between the floor and the rear suspension that caused sudden and unpredictable drops in aerodynamic load, perfectly explaining why Hamilton felt the car disconnect underneath him in high-speed transitions. The situation became even worse when tire performance was analyzed. Ferrari once again failed to bring the tires into the ideal temperature window, meaning Hamilton began the lap with no front-end bite and no confidence, losing nearly half a second in the opening corners alone compared to teams like McLaren and Mercedes that activated their tires immediately. While rivals were instantly generating grip, Hamilton spent the entire lap waiting for performance that never arrived, which destroyed his chances in the very sector where he usually excels. To try to stabilize the rear, Hamilton chose a higher downforce setup, but instead of solving the underlying mechanical issue, it only added drag, making him slower on the straights while still leaving the car unstable through the corners, resulting in a setup that harmed every part of the lap. This meant Hamilton couldn't attack, couldn't defend, and couldn't improve, leaving him stuck with a car that was compromised in every direction. Even Leclerc, who managed to reach Q3, finished last among the top 10 and was beaten by midfield drivers like Pierre Gasly and Fernando Alonso, proving that Ferrari's collapse was not about Hamilton's pace, but about a car fundamentally outside its operating window. Ferrari's earlier decision to freeze development of the SF-25 in April now looks catastrophic, and Qatar made that strategic mistake painfully clear. Hamilton's radio messages revealed his mindset during the session. Rather than shouting in anger, he sounded resigned, calmly telling the team that the car would not go any faster and had reached its maximum limit. And an additional internal message that wasn't broadcast on television showed Hamilton warning that the car felt dangerous through the fast corners due to a complete lack of grip. Normally, this level of driver concern triggers an FIA safety review, and that is exactly what happened. The governing body confirmed that the instability Hamilton described matched abnormalities in the car's aerodynamic loading, leading to one unavoidable conclusion: Ferrari's structural flaw, combined with their early development shutdown, has left the SF-25 fundamentally incapable of competing at the front. For Hamilton, the Qatar Grand Prix has now turned into a survival mission. Starting near the back with a car that overheats in traffic and loses grip instantly in high-speed corners means scoring points is nearly impossible unless the race turns chaotic with multiple safety cars. Hamilton remains an elite driver, but the SF-25 has collapsed underneath him, leaving him fighting for nothing more than data and dignity in the closing races of the season. The root cause behind Hamilton's disaster in Qatar qualifying is that the SF25 never entered the required performance window for a track that demands stability, traction, and confidence through sustained high-speed loads. From the second Hamilton began his run, he was battling a car that reacted unpredictably to every steering input, with the rear feeling loose as if the car was pivoting around an unstable point he could not influence. When Hamilton loses reference in medium-speed corners, the entire lap falls apart because he cannot build momentum or trust the platform beneath him, and telemetry confirmed that he couldn't mount a proper attack even against midfield opponents. Another major issue came from the car's inability to generate tire temperature in the first sector, as the cold tires denied Hamilton the mechanical grip needed to lean on the front end. As he turned into the early sequence of corners, the car understeered initially and then suddenly transitioned into oversteer as the rear let go, creating an imbalance that destroyed his confidence and made the SF25 unpredictable at the worst possible track. Meanwhile, the teams around him had fully activated their tires within the opening seconds, giving them grip Hamilton never accessed. The structural issue identified by the FIA was even more damaging. The inconsistent aerodynamic load caused by the interaction between the floor and rear suspension produced sudden drops in rear stability, which meant Hamilton received no warning before the car snapped, forcing him to drive with a margin far too large to be competitive. Hamilton repeated these concerns over the radio, describing violent snaps in the final sector, and the aerodynamic data later confirmed his exact sensations. Another problem stemmed from the high downforce setup decision. Hamilton selected this configuration to calm the rear, but it failed to address the mechanical imbalance, only slowing him down on the straights and leaving him unstable in the corners. Ferrari effectively delivered a car that was compromised everywhere on the lap, offering no performance upside and several additional drawbacks. Comparing Hamilton's driving to Leclerc's highlighted the depth of the issue. Even though Leclerc made Q3, he still finished a distant 10th and more than a full second behind the pole-setting McLaren, showing the Ferrari was never a competitive package for Qatar regardless of the driver. The 0.3 Leclerc found over Hamilton in Q1 came from a slightly more stable rear balance. But that small difference did not change the fact that Ferrari was fundamentally uncompetitive. The next major factor behind Ferrari's collapse was their early season decision to shut down development of the SF25. While rivals continued upgrading throughout the year, Ferrari's package stagnated, and Qatar brutally exposed that stagnation. The SF25 now behaves like a car from the early part of the season, while other teams have moved forward significantly, leaving Hamilton to deal with the consequences of a strategic choice he had no control over. The final complication was psychological. Hamilton's messages reflected a driver who knew the car had reached its ceiling. He calmly told his engineer he could not go faster and insisted the car felt unsafe through the fast corners, a warning that typically forces a technical review, and in this case, the FIA agreed that Hamilton's concerns aligned with the data. When a seven-time world champion warns about stability and the telemetry confirms it, the issue becomes one of safety rather than performance, and in Qatar, Hamilton lacked both. Inside the Ferrari engineering room, pressure reached its highest level of the season as the team sifted through data that showed Hamilton's SF25 operating outside its intended mechanical window from the very start of the session. Engineers detected irregularities in ride behavior that matched every sudden snap Hamilton reported, forcing the team into immediate structural checks because unstable rear load at a high-speed circuit turns a performance deficiency into a safety threat. The first major engineering challenge was determining how the floor and rear suspension interacted under peak loads, with data showing inconsistent aerodynamic pressure in medium-speed corners that triggered rapid load drops. When the aerodynamic platform becomes unreliable, the suspension must absorb the imbalance, but the SF25 was unable to do so cleanly, triggering a chain reaction that destabilized the chassis further. Engineers now need to determine whether this stems from wear, temperature behavior, or an internal stiffness mismatch. Tire issues added more pressure, as Ferrari's poor tire warm-up didn't just harm driver confidence, but created a technical domino effect, since cold tires force the aerodynamic platform to carry more load. And if that platform is unstable, the problem becomes catastrophic. Engineers must now redesign Hamilton's tire preparation sequence for the race because the one-lap procedure was completely outside the working window. Hamilton's high downforce setup attempt also created additional engineering challenges. The extra drag slowed him massively on the straights while masking the mechanical issue, meaning engineers must now decide whether any aerodynamic adjustments can actually help or risk making the instability even worse. Comparing Hamilton's car to Leclerc's added another complicated layer. Leclerc's SF25 had a slightly more stable balance, but both cars still suffered from the same fundamental instability. Engineers now face the difficult task of determining why two identical cars behave differently and whether the cause is setup sensitivity, chassis variance, or tire interaction differences. The broader pressure comes from Ferrari's development freeze. With no new upgrades available, Ferrari's engineers are fighting complex structural problems using only setup tweaks, tire management, and load balancing, leaving them with limited tools and amplifying every weakness Hamilton experiences.